Welcome back. So, we're going to pick up our discussion today about Ronald Reagan. And when we left off yesterday, um, we the last thing that we talked about was um, Ronald Reagan. He moved to Hollywood. Met Jane Wyman, got married, started making a lot of movies, and as I alluded to, he's going to start to kind of dip his toe into politics. Um, and during this time, one of the big issues, as we've already discussed, is going to be McCarthyism. And he is going to get caught up in this. Remember, we talked about the Hollywood 10. We talked about how you were either, supporting them or you were um, against them. Um, and so he is going to side with McCarthy, and because he, again, has been an actor for a long time, he isn't one of those major superstars, and so he does have a little bit of a grudge, and he feels that maybe there are some forces working against him, and the biggest one that he chooses to, that's kind of the elephant in the room is communism. So he joins up with McCarthy. Um, and so he, again, as it says on your screen, he is going to, because he does take the stand, and there are a lot that, you know, are communists and that are in the movie industry. He does feel a little threatened, and so he does, carry a gun for his own safety. Um, and so we said that he had married Jane Wyman, and they were having some marital problems, kind of, in the late 1940s, and she was a much bigger star than him, and so. And some of his politics, kind of was hurting her career. And so they did end up getting divorced. And a few years later, he does meet and marry Nancy Davis, who they do have two kids together with, Patty and Ronald Reagan. And they are going to, stay married for the next, almost 50 years. For the rest of their life, they're going to be together. Um, and again, he is still acting, and one of the, you know, how would we say it? One of his major co-stars was the chimpanzee Bonzo. And there was a whole kind of series of bedtime for Bonzo. He was kind of the straight man for a chimpanzee. He worked in television, and you did some theater. So, it's kind of struggling, and he got a little bit more and more into conservative politics, um, again, following, McCarthyism, and through the 50s. And then in the 1960s, he is going to kind of have his breakout moment. In 1964, the presidential race, he is going to back Barry Goldwater. Um, Remember, he's the Republican, and he being Ronald Reagan, gave a coast to coast speech um, that was about 30 minutes long. And you're going, wow, that's really, yes. It was a 30-minute kind of commercial in which he talked about, you know, the direction that our government needs to go in, and how Barry Goldwater was, the man to lead our country. And this was his, kind of breakout moment in politics. And you can see that 2 years later, he runs for governor. This is, his first political elected position is governor of California. And guess what? He wins. And so just as he was, not very successful he had a long career, but he wasn't this major star in movies. He skyrockets right to the top of politics. And so he is going to win, and he runs again in 1970. In the 1968 presidential election, the Republicans kind of were looking at him and thought, maybe he would be, a good candidate to rival Nixon, but they go with Nixon. So he runs again for governor of California in 1970, and he wins. And now, he's not going to go against Nixon in 72, but in 76, he says, this is my time. And he challenges Ford, and he almost wins, as we've already talked about. This causes a split in the Republican Party, and Carter wins. And so from this point on, he's really going to start working to become president. And as we've already talked about, we know that he gets tapped in 1980, and we know that he basically, runs the tables on Carter. And so we are ready then for 1981 when he is going to be sworn in. So, shortly after he is sworn in, there is going to be an assassination attempt on his life. He is at a speaking event in Washington, D.C., when a young man right here, all right, by the name of John Hinckley Jr., is going to, here he is, this is just a few minutes before he's shot at, and he's walking into the hotel, and this man right here, his name is James Brady. He is his press secretary. So John Hinckley is going to approach and is going to fire shots at the president, and the president is actually going to be hit, and he is going to be hit in the chest, but it's not fatal. And James Brady right here is going to be hit also, and he will be paralyzed from the damage that it does to his spine. But John Hinckley is going to be apprehended, and his motivation is because he wanted Jodie Foster, who was a well-known, she's still an actress today. She's also a director. She's a little older today, but at this time she was young, and everybody, wanted her to be their girlfriend, and she's very, very popular actress at this time. And he had an obsession with her, and so he wanted to get her attention, and so he said, well, this is how I'll get her attention. And he is still alive, and he has been allowed to go kind of on parole, and he lives with his mother, goes, and he's kind of like on house arrest now. And so still out there. But James Brady, as we said, was shot, and he was paralyzed. And then a few years after this, there's going to be what's called Brady Bill, which has to do with limiting who could get a gun, and just putting some parameters on gun rights. Not only, so this happens in 1981, just maybe 2 months after that the president has been sworn in, but during the years of 80 and 81, there's going to be a couple different world figures that are going to also be either assassinated, or their life was there was an attempt on their assassination, so on their life. So let's talk about a couple other people. One of the persons that on May 13th, 1981, John Paul II was assassinated, or there was an attempt on his life when he was out giving his blessings in the Vatican, while the the grounds of the Vatican. Um, and a Turkish um, advocate right here, his name is Mehmet Ali Aka, right here, is going to shoot the president 4 times. He is Turkish, but he does have ties to the KGB, which is, the Russian kind of, CIA. Um, and Pope John Paul II was a very big advocate of ending communism. Um, and so many years later, the Pope is going to meet with Mehmet and is going to forgive him. And eventually, I believe Mehmet does convert to Catholicism. But the Pope does live. And when we visited the Vatican um, 2 summers ago, they do have a marker, and you can stand on the spot where he was. There was an attempt on his life, and this is why now the Pope rides in, his Pope mobile, and it's all plexiglass, and you can't, you don't have direct access. And so when you do see Pope Francis interact with people, it's pretty rare, just because of this assassination attempt. Another assassination attempt was, but this one was successful, was on John Lennon, right? And so we know he was the leader of the Beatles. And this one happened in December of 1980. Mark David Chapman is going to shoot John Lennon outside of his home in New York City. And we know that he does die from that. Another assassination attempt, which was successful, and you can see it happening right here in this photo, and then this is the aftermath of it, is on Anwar Sadat. And we talked about him under Jimmy Carter when we had the Camp David Accord trying to bring Egypt and Israel together. This happened on October 6th, 1981. There was a military parade, and Anwar Sadat, who was the leader of Egypt, is going to be there watching the parade. A number of troops rushed from one of the trucks and threw grenades and fired machine guns. 20 are injured, 4 of them being Americans, and Sadat is going to die. And this was part of, an Islamic jihad, because they felt that Sadat had, turned from his Arabic brothers in trying to, make peace with the Israelis. And then finally, Indira Gandhi, right here, who is the granddaughter of Mahat, and she is going to be the Prime Minister of India. And on October 31st, and this is just a little bit later, it's going to be 1984, but it's the same idea. She is going to be shot while walking to her office by 2 of her own bodyguards. And there's deep unrest in India over, which direction and who should be their leader, and should they be sympathetic, to the divisions that were happening. And so just some, world leaders that, kind of very turbulent time during the early 80s. Something else that's going to happen during this time is we are going to have the space shuttle is going to, the first space shuttle is going to go up in April of 1981. It's called the Columbia. And then about 5 years later, we're going to have the Challenger in January of 1986. It is the 25th shuttle. And so you can click on these links and watch the videos. We can bring it up here. Let's see how quickly, if we can do this. I can remember this very clearly. I was a freshman in college, sitting in front of the TV watching the Challenger take off because of this woman right here. Her name is Krista McCullough. She was a science teacher who had, participated in a challenge to, go up in space. She wasn't an astronaut, but um, she she won, and so it was very, got a lot of press. Um, and it was a very diverse group. You can see, there's women, there's, different minorities, and it. So it was again just historic. And we know that just a few minutes, 73 seconds after liftoff, it is going to explode, and very tragic. And so let's see, we'll put this back down here. And so those seven crew members are going to die on that. We also have this situation with, as I've alluded to a couple times, with the hostages in Iran. And so we're going to revisit this, but we know that the day that Ronald Reagan is sworn in, the 60, by this time it was down to 52 U.S. hostages were released. And we will talk about, some of the details as to why they were released on that certain day, and some of the other things that go along with that. We also have two other situations that are going to happen during his presidency, in which we commit troops. One is going to be in Grenada in October of 1983, where their Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop, is going to be killed in a pro-communist military coup. And we are going to send in 6,000 U.S. troops to protect U.S. medical students that are there, going to school. Now you're saying, where is Grenada? People probably never even heard of that. It is in the Caribbean. And we do send in the troops, and just, magically, they are going to, overcome the coup and restore democracy. Another situation in which we kind of flex our muscles is going to be in Libya in April of 1986, in which Muammar Gaddafi is going to be in control there. The U.S. is going to, and we know that he is not a friend of the United States. He's, pro-Arab, anti-Israeli. The U.S. warplanes are going to bomb Tripoli and Benghazi in retaliation for a couple missile attacks that Gaddafi is going to launch against our aircraft, and a couple other incidents in which servicemen and women are going to be killed. So you can see it's a very turbulent time in the whole world, not only at home. And one of the other issues that is, facing the whole world at this time is going to be AIDS. And we know what AIDS is. It's the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, where your body is not able to fight off germs and cancers and other, bacterias, and we know this is when it's, that it most of the time it does result in death. Much different today because people can live with AIDS. There's different strains to it. We know much more about it, but this is a time where it is very scary. We don't know how it can be contracted, and how it's passed along to different people, and it seems as if it's just kind of like a pandemic, like we're living through right now. So lots of investigating in. So again, turmoil, not only at home but also in the rest of the world. And so that is going to bring us to the 1984 presidential election. And you should be able to answer through number 20 on your worksheet. And we'll pick up with 1984 election. Well, we'll leave this up for a few minutes. So I guess I forgot to click it. So we can see, whoops. I don't know why my mouse isn't working, but, you know, Beirut, Lebanon, we're going to have a situation there. Falklands, there's Grenada, Libya. I guess they really didn't kind of talk about Lebanon. We could talk about that. You can read that. It's right there. Didn't put that on there. But we do have the military barracks, and that's the bottom picture down there, in which 242 Marines are going to be killed. So you should be familiar with that. You can add that to your chart for number 19. Add Lebanon on there. Okay. All right, so now we will pick up and talk about the 1984 presidential election, and we'll come back to the Iran-Contra scandal. All right, and then we'll be finished. Talk to you later.